Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so as you probably know by now, we're looking at the overall theme of a discourse of the Buddha called the Karaniya Metta Sutta. Sutta means discourse. Karaniya means something like what you should do. So we could say it's the discourse on what you should do, metta. Metta is what you should do, basically. That's what it's saying. It starts by telling us if you want to do what's true, if we want to do what is truly good for us, then this is what we need to do. And the sutta starts out by describing the sort of person, sort of character we should seek to develop. And then it moves on to tell us all about metta as a path all the way up to transcendental insight, all the way up to enlightenment. So as we heard from Vimaladasa last week, the first thing we should do is aim to become a capable person. It says, the Buddha tells us in this really straightforward, unambiguous way, start by becoming a capable person, which might be a bit of a surprise, really. Vimaladasa related this to the first stage of Sangha's 5 aspects of the spiritual path, integration. So these 5 stages, which basically describe the process, it's like describing the process of the growth of a tree. There's no other way to describe it, it's just true. It describes what happens in any real spiritual growth. And so those stages are integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, and spiritual rebirth, with receptivity underlying them all. We're going to hear a lot more about those, I think, in future talks, but I'm going to say something more about them and their relation to the sutta today. So we could describe these stages as, firstly, become an individual. Become an individual. Become a capable individual. Develop a strong sense of self. Become, a capable, strong, self-motivated person. Not just a bundle of competing motivations to get blown around by moods as they happen, or by other people's approval or disapproval or circumstances. Become an individual with a direction. And just that business of capability, I mean, that's important. If we're not capable, if we can't look after ourselves, how are we going to go any further? We haven't got any time or space for others, basically. So integration, start by becoming an integrated individual. So start by becoming an individual, then become a connected individual, positive emotion. An individual who's connected to others by bonds of metta, loyalty, gratitude. Someone who experiences positive emotion. So that's the second stage. And in a way, the main message of the sutta, that we need to develop positive emotion, and metta is the root of positive emotion. It's the metta, root of all positive emotion. Then, having become a connected individual with strong positive emotion, become more than just an individual. Become someone who's not limited and defined by personal likes and dislikes and fears and the whole structure of our small, limited self. Step beyond that small self. Become more than just an individual. Become something more expansive, more universal, more boundless. Or as the sutta says, develop an unlimited heart. Develop an unlimited heart of metta. Heart and mind in the Dharma in Buddhism aren't really separated. They're not really separated out of the same thing. Develop an unlimited mind, develop an unlimited heart. And metta is the way to do that. So to do that, we need to let go of our cramped attachment to our own views and our own wants and our own fears and our likes and our dislikes and our habitual patterns. And we need to be able to rise above those That means letting go of the old self. It means spiritual death. And this goes along with becoming something much larger, or allowing ourselves to be open to something much larger, a spiritual rebirth. Could say we need to step out of our small mind and open up to big mind. As I've said, we need receptivity right throughout that process of going through integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth. We need to be open to the Dharma and the teachings of the Dharma. We need to be open to good advice. We need to be open to spiritual friendship. We need to be open to our own deeper wisdom. And we also need to be open to what I can only describe as higher influences, if you like. And as I say, we'll go into more detail about this in some of the talks that follow. But tonight I'm going to explore just how this sutta takes us through this whole process. So we've already looked at the stage of integration, becoming an individual. So tonight I'm going to look at how it gives us a teaching to become a connected individual and to become more than an individual, how it includes spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. How it in fact describes the whole path up to enlightenment, the whole path to what it describes as an infinite, boundless heart and mind. And how it tells us that the practice of metta is the way to follow this path. The practice of metta leads us to what the sutta calls a mind beyond all narrowness, an unbounded mind. That is, it says, like living in heaven right here and now. So in effect, it tells us how the Metta Bhavana, it tells us the Metta Bhavana is the most important practice that we could do. How if we know what is truly good for us, as the sutta says, then we will make the Metta Bhavana a central part of our practice. And in the West, there can be a tendency for people who get involved in Buddhism to ignore the Metta Bhavana and other basic, simple practices, so-called, and get onto the sort of real stuff, straight into what folks see as the advanced practices, vipassana, insight practices. But this is a mistake. It tends to be a heady negative approach, which ignores our emotional alienation, our negative emotions. It ignores the fact that we may be out of touch with our emotions, that we may be subject to all sorts of negative emotions. It doesn't deal with the real obstacles that stand between us and enlightenment, which are our ego-based reactions to other people, our old patterns, deep emotional patterns. And it tries to jump over these and short-circuit the path, jump over these and give us a sort of phony sense of having gone beyond the self, which is not going to work because it's not based on any sort of foundation. So for a start, we need to become a person of strong, positive emotion. There's absolutely no point in going for insight if we're not a person of strong, positive emotion. We need to do the Metta Bhavana to get anywhere. Although it has to be said that the Buddha did not teach the Metta Bhavana as we do it. Okay, so what the Buddha taught was he just told his followers, send love and goodwill in all directions to all beings, beyond all rivalry, beyond all hatred, beyond all narrowness. Just do that. Oh, easy peasy. Easy peasy. Well, maybe it was for his followers at the time. Maybe it was easy peasy for his followers at the time. But we're not going to be able to do that. If we try and do that, it's just a fantasy. it's possible to sit in the last stage of the Metta Bhavana and think, oh, I'm serving good and love and goodwill to all beings, right, except them. And that was obviously true of a lot of other people. So after the Buddha's death, the very revered teacher Buddha Gosha formulated a more structured approach, a more structured practice, that the one that we do, so that we approach this unlimited mind of metta in practical, bite-sized chunks, basically. And we need to do this structured practice more or less as it was taught, because it can be comparatively easy to think we love everybody and everything, while actually we still feel ill will to actual real people in our lives. That means, as I say, we're jumping over the real issues and pretending to already be nearly enlightened, but that's just fantasy, unless we deal with our stuff. So we need to go through through Buddha Gosha's stages, the stages of the Metta Bhavana, the structured Metta Bhavana that we practice, to make our love for all beings a reality and not just a sort of self-delusion. So, and this practice, it's not just a positive emotion practice. The sutta tells us that it takes us all the way to enlightenment, all the way to stepping off the wheel, as it puts it. So how can that be? How can a practice that's just about metta do that? Well, our founder and teacher, Sangha Night, has said about this that developing insight, moving towards, if you like, selflessness, if you like, is not about destroying the self, which is often how it's understood. It's about expanding our sense of identification and our sense of cherishing beyond ourselves and a few beings around us to include all beings, all people first, all beings, everything, the world. It's about expanding out in that way, expanding our identification and cherishing. And that's, of course, exactly what we do in the Metta Bhavana. We gradually expand it from self out to all beings. So yeah, the Metta Bhavana takes us, as we practice it, as we do it, it takes us all the way from becoming aware of our cherishing for ourselves, all the way from self-cherishing and those cherishing those we're close to, up and out, eventually to include all beings, and on the way, giving us an opportunity to become aware of and rise above our ego-based reactions to actual people, our indifference to some people, totally indifference. As long as they're no good to us, as long as they don't figure in our life, we just don't care about them. We don't see them as people, beyond our indifference and beyond our dislike for actual people, without which love for all beings is a fantasy. So that's the first stage. The first stage is metta for oneself, metta oneself. That's supposed to be easy. It's assumed that what we cherish most is ourselves, and if we connect with that, we can then sort of expand that out to others, to a wider circle. And while it's true that we care quite naturally about ourselves, more than we do about anyone else, to be honest, except maybe children who are sort of an extension of ourselves, we care about ourselves, but we don't always feel good about ourselves. Especially it seems in our society, and that seems to create a problem for a lot of us, that we don't feel good about ourselves. So that when we come to this first stage of the metta, we sort of stub our toe against it. It seems to be a feature of our culture. I think it's something to do with the way we were brought up as kids, because I don't see it in some other cultures so much. Well, I think as children we're often made to feel that we're not okay. I know I was certainly not made to feel that I was unconditionally okay as a child. Certainly not unconditionally, unless I earned it. And even then, praise was pretty scanty in case I became big-headed. So yeah, I didn't grow up feeling great about myself, really. I had to prove myself all the time. And it's taken quite a lot of practice to get beyond that, really. I've had to do quite a lot of work to leave that behind. So that's one problem, that although we cherish ourselves, certainly we may not feel good about ourselves, so we stub our toe on the practice, because we have this sense of not being okay. And the second problem that I experience, anyway, I don't know if others do, is that metta seems naturally to be something that goes out to others. I can send metta to somebody else, or send it out to all beings, but turning it back on myself seems a bit odd. It's too sharp a corner. It just seems odd. And the Buddha, when he talks about metta, he's talking about sending it out there. He's not sort of talking about like that. So I just experienced a difficulty with sending metta to myself. And well, personally, I've found a solution to both of these things in something that maybe it'd be useful to others. So what I do, and what I've done for considerable time, is in the Metta Bhavana, especially the first stage, I imagine myself in the presence of a higher being. A Buddha, a Bodhisattva, an angel, if you like. I imagine myself in the presence of a higher being, and I feel their metta for me. I open up to their metta for me. I feel bathed in metta, and of course then I feel metta. I feel their acceptance and understanding of my conditioned state, my conditioned nature. So I experience their metta, and I join in with their metta, if you like. I experience their metta for me. And I take that through the whole practice, actually. I take that through the whole practice, that what I'm doing is not so much squeezing out metta from myself as opening up to the metta that this higher being feels for these various people. So if that works for you, might work, might help. At each stage, be aware of being in the presence of a higher being aware of sort of being bathed in metta. Sangha talks about the Metta Bhavana as not so much churning out our own metta, as becoming aware of the metta that's everywhere, which we could say is this higher being, if you like. So that when we could say that higher being represents what I've called big mind, if you like. So that when we stumble on our actual indifference or dislike to others, it gives us a way to rise above that, because we can sort of step into it, experience a bit of big mind, which is above those reactions. It gives us a higher perspective, the perspective of what I've been calling big mind, bodhicitta, if you like. And in that way, doing it that way, the Metta Bhavana includes receptivity, because we're being receptive to metta, which is already there. So that's one thing that I do about how do I sort of go with metta. I don't. I feel it coming into me from elsewhere. I feel bathed in it. Something else about not feeling good about ourselves. Warning, Vadanya is about to say something shocking. You might want to stop your ears. Sometimes we don't feel good about ourselves because there isn't much to feel good about. If we act mainly on our wants and fears, even when this hurts others, if we are grabby and stingy and ungenerous, if we spend a lot of time in craving and distraction, if we bend the truth to suit our own, what we want all the time, we'll find it hard to feel good about ourselves. If we looked at someone else, if we imagine that we're looking at someone else looking at us, if we looked at someone else who was like us and we couldn't feel good about them, then why should we feel good about ourselves? One powerful way to feel better about ourselves is to be more worthy of feeling good about ourselves. To be more kind, to act more kindly, to do acts of kindness, to do acts of generosity, to be honest, even when it hurts, to be strong and capable, as in the sutta, straightforward, as in the sutta, so honest, and lead a meaningful life. Now, if we do all of that, it becomes a lot easier to feel good about ourselves. That's a very unfashionable thing to say, but I just said it. So the first part of the sutta, the preparation for the first stage of the Metta Bhavana is in a way a preparation for the first stage of the Metta Bhavana. It says, start by becoming a capable person. Have respect for others, avoid greed and craving. Be honest and straightforward. That's the preparation for the first stage of the Metta Bhavana. So that brings us to the second stage, the good friend. And the idea is that this is someone we quite naturally feel goodwill towards. We quite naturally feel good towards, quite naturally want what's good for them. We quite naturally feel goodwill. We will will their good. And the tradition tells us, make this somebody of the same gender, someone you're not sexually attracted to, someone more or less the same age, same sort of generation, so that you're not feeling like they're your child or anything. That's the idea. And I think that's a really good idea, because that's where we have work to do. I mean, it might be quite easy to feel metta for our child. We just accept them quite, everything about them. Oh, my son, he's lovely, he's wonderful, even his bad bits are wonderful. Or our pet, or something like that. And maybe it's okay to relax those stringencies. If we really find it hard to develop any metta, if we need to just find a way to warm our heart up. So I suppose using a close relation with a pet might be okay if that's what we need to do. But I think we should recognize that this is spiritual baby food. Okay? And it's spiritual baby food because it doesn't give us anything to chew on. What we have to chew on is all those horrible things that other people do, especially people like us that are competitive. They want things that we don't want. They don't want things that we want, etc., etc. It doesn't really give us anything to chew on. Real people, even our good friend, there may be resentments, there may be competitiveness, there may be all sorts of things. They won't always go along with us. And that's likely to be much more the case for real people of a similar age, of a similar sex, and not our children or whatever. We need to start by becoming aware of our reactions to people, our negative reactions to people, our negative feelings, and rising above them. And if we don't ever call to mind anyone who elicits those, well, we don't have that to chew on. We don't have that to work on. So if we want to get to the stage of sending metta to all, we have to start by sending metta to real people, because real people, frankly, they're annoying. It takes the practice beyond spiritual baby food. So how do we do that? Well, for a start, we have to be open and accept how we really feel. How do we really feel? I think some of the problems that some people have with this is because if we sit on it, if we don't own up to the fact that actually I'm really cheesed off with that, if we don't own up to ill will, if we don't own up to all those nasty negative emotions, then we tend to shut off all our emotional life. So we just don't feel our emotions. So we start by becoming aware of our emotions. We need to do that. Become aware of them, but don't allow them to, as it were, dominate us. So there's a book, isn't there, called Lost. Oh, well, never mind. One thing that's really useful in the Metta Bhavana, and one way to rise above sort of negative reactions is to use the phrases in the traditional teaching. The Metta Bhavana is about wishing others well. It's about wishing well. May they be happy. May they be free from suffering. May they progress. It's about wanting what's good for the person, not just about a nice warm feeling. So the phrases express a wish, and that wish is what's really important about the practice. A pleasant warm feeling may accompany the wish for the well-being, but it's the wish that's important. So may this person be happy, may they be well, may they be free from suffering. And something else that's really contentious that I'm going to say, that I do, is I'm sitting in the presence of a higher being and I pray for the other person. I'm asking, may this person be happy. I'm asking something. I'm not just sending a message out nowhere. I'm actually asking the universe, may this person be happy. I'm in effect praying for this person. And for me, that gets the practice out of being about me and my nice feelings and makes it about the other person. I'm genuinely trying to benefit that other person by calling something bigger than me to help them, praying to something. Because I think that, the Metta Bhavana has got to be about the other person. To make the Metta Bhavana about me and my feelings is frankly weird. It's not what it's about the other person. So that is something which I do. And if that appeals to you, you might give it a go. But yes, I do spend the whole practice sitting, I imagine, in the presence of a higher being. And I'm asking that being to help this person. I'm asking this being to spare that person suffering, please. May they be happy. May they be well. May they be, please don't let them suffer. And I think that makes it a wish, which I think is what the practice should be about. That's the good friend. And then the third stage of the practice, of course, is the neutral person. So enlightenment, spiritual growth involves expanding our awareness. So we have a tendency, strong tendency as human beings, if someone's not relevant to me and my wants and fears, if they're not sort of part of my life, I don't take them into account as a real person. They're just a cardboard cutout. They're not important. So we need to expand our awareness to include that other person, those other people, all of those other people as real people. We need to do that. I think we need to use our imagination to bring those people to life, to mind, bring them alive. That person, that bus driver, that person operating the till, that shopkeeper, that other member of the Sangha that I don't know the name of, they're real people. They're a whole world. They're as much a whole world as I am. They're as much a whole world as my good friend. There's a whole world in there. And we may not know them, but we can sort of imaginatively just bring them to mind. And perhaps imagine what we look like to them. That's practice of what's called exchanging self and other. It's quite an important one in the Metta Bhavana. What do I look like to them? Oh dear. So yeah, using the imagination to bring the person to mind, to just really connect with, there's a whole world there, just as important as mine. And to connect also with just a sense of solidarity that human beings have with one another. Something that I used to quite strongly try and think is that if someone pulled me out of a burning car after an accident, I would feel really, I'd love them. They were great. I'd be so grateful. They couldn't do it. If they had flaws in their character, well, that wouldn't matter, would it? I'd just be really grateful to them. But anyone would pull us from a burning car. That's the nature of human solidarity with each other. We would. So it's a pure accident that person I don't know hasn't pulled me from a burning car, because they would. So why don't I just feel towards them as I would if they did? Pure accident otherwise. Anyone would do it. Pure chance. So yeah, the bus driver, the checkout person, the shopkeeper. Imagine ourselves in their shoes. What's it like to be them, and what does it like? What do we like to them? And we can practice this in our daily life. Thank the checkout person. Thank the bus driver, the waiter, whatever. Relate to them as a friend. Relate to them as though you're being served by a friend. So I remember Vajratara once saying that, well, in Sheffield, we're great. Well, it's better than some places at that. Better than some places I could name. We thank bus drivers. And I remember Vajratara saying, I wouldn't want to live anywhere where people didn't thank the bus driver. Which I think is the reason she didn't go to London, anyway. I wouldn't want to live anywhere where they don't thank the bus driver. So, yeah, it's an expansion of awareness. It's an expansion of awareness to move from small mind to big mind, just to see the world and people, not just in terms of what's important to me, and to see the world through more than one pair of eyes, more than one point of view. A lot of our lack of wisdom is that we've got this particular point of view we see through lenses of our own wants, needs, patterns, etc. And just that. And that's a very limiting way of being. So that's the neutral person. And then we get to the really chewy part of practice, the difficult person. So, yeah, okay. We all know the recommendations. Don't start with Putin. It needs to be people we know. People we know. We don't know these demon figures from the news. We don't know them. So it needs to be someone we know, and preferably not somebody who's blighted the whole life and the history of our family, because that might be too hard work. We start with something smaller than that. There's no problem about that. We're going to find plenty of people. We're going to find plenty of people who just really piss us off, just really annoy us, or really get in our way, or disagree with us at meetings, or criticise us. What right have they got to do that? Etc., etc. So we really come up against this is the stage where we really come up against the need to rise above our usual reactions. That spiritual death aspect of the practice of leaving our small limited self, or putting our small limited self to one side and seeing things from a bigger perspective, so that we can be reborn as a bigger person, closer to being a bodhisattva or a Buddha. So how do we do that? How do we do that? You know, when you sit down with Metta Bhavana, oh yes, you can see that bus driver's a lovely person. And then we call to mind, what we do is we call to mind all the things we don't like about them for a start. We don't call to mind the things we do like about them, or their positive qualities. We're sort of like straight for the thing that annoys us. So one thing is just to think about them differently. Think about them as a more all-round person. A few other hints, tips. We could ask ourselves, do I ever doing anything similar to the thing that they do that annoys me so much? Because it's almost a truism that often the characteristics that we really goat in other people are characteristics that we have in maybe a lesser manner ourselves, which is why it so annoys us. And that's, yeah, so another thing I think we can do, I'll say something about that maybe for myself. I mean, I really get annoyed when you've got a queue of traffic and people zoom up the outside lane and cut in at the front. That's infuriating. How would I love to do it? And there was a spell when I used to work in an NGO, and I used to write a lot of funding applications and funding reports to Comic Relief, the EU, all sorts of other people. And, I just got really skilled at putting the best face on the truth. Spin the truth. And when I heard politicians spinning the truth, I just wanted to throw something at the television. Because, in a way, I think it annoyed me so much because I was doing it a bit, actually. So, yeah, do I ever do anything similar? I think, yeah, we could reflect that we're all deluded. We're all a bit insane, according to the Buddha. We're sort of possessed, driven insane, possessed by negative mental states. In the Bodhicharya text by 8th century text that's very famous as well as this one, the author says that human beings are basically good. But this is hidden by a sort of madness very often. We're possessed by negative states that are a sort of madness. So if we see a friend behaving unskillfully towards us, we might imagine, well, if I had a dear friend who had been sent insane by perhaps a blow to the head or something like that, even if they were being unpleasant, my response would be compassion. My response would be compassion. So not ill will. So here is my potentially dear friend acting in this insane manner. I should feel compassion, not ill will. We should also, just recognise that it's due to conditions. So there's in the Bodhicharya Avatar, it also says when somebody hits us with a stick, we don't blame the stick. But the person is wielded by conditions, just as the stick is wielded by the person. And we need to take on board that people are conditioned, and so are we. And we are also unskillful. We try and pretend we're not, but we are. We are. We also we tread on other people's toes, just as other people tread on our toes. So a few other things we could do is imagine ourselves again in their shoes, and how do I look to them? So in that meeting where I come up with my bright idea and they nix it, how do I look to them? What's it like to be in their shoes, seeing me? And I think that again is an expansion of awareness to see there are two sides to this. They probably really dislike me. Just as and for reasons, just as I do them. So imagine ourselves in their shoes, and I think again, use the phrases. You don't have to like somebody to not want them to suffer. If you really think, well, yeah, this person really annoys me, but do I want them to suffer? No, I don't want them to suffer. Do I want them to be? Yeah, I do actually want them to be happy. I want them to be well. I don't want to be ill. I think that can sort of just get beyond those sort of rather trivial annoyances, etc., and connect with our common humanity, our solidarity with that person, because we don't want them to suffer. And finally, of course, we can do what I've been saying all along, which is do this practice in the presence of a higher being. And see this difficult person through the eyes of this higher being, or call call them to mind in the presence of this higher being and feel that higher being's metta also for this other difficult person, just as much as it is for me. Their understanding of the reasons why the person is as they are and us. Be receptive to that metta that's everywhere and open up to it, feel it, join in with it. And in the eyes of a higher being, you know that person is not going to be, they're not going to be fulminating against that person for what they said in that meeting. That's not going to happen. So that's the difficult stage, the stage with loads to chew on, which is really demanding in a way that we step out of that small self, step out and just, I'm me, and anyone who gets in my way or treads on my toes or whatever gets a reaction. We're sort of stepping out. It's a spiritual death. It's a spiritual death that opens the way to a spiritual rebirth. We're leaving behind old patterns, old habits, etc. So and doing this business of invoking up a higher being, my experience is it gets me out of the way for a while. It gets me out of the way for a while and gives me a little experience of experiencing a higher mind. And that brings us to the culmination of the practice, the final stage. Develop an unlimited heart of friendliness for all beings, develop an unlimited heart of friendliness for the whole universe, sending love, goodwill in all directions, above, below, and all around, beyond all narrowness, beyond all rivalry, beyond all hatred. The culmination, we're just sort of imagining goodwill going out there to all humans and to all beings in the world, and then to the whole world, to the, even maybe the physical structure of the world becomes almost like a light going out. It's impersonal. But it starts with us, moves through the neutral person, moves through the difficult person, and then moves on to all humans. And then wider out from there. And in many sadhanas, in many sort of practices that order members take on, where you do in fact sit in the presence of a higher being, a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. In many of these practices, we sit in the presence of a higher being and become aware that they are sending metta and compassion out unreservedly to all beings. That's part of the practice, which of course is to some extent why I do it that way. They're radiating, it's often seen as light, they're radiating light out to all beings, but they're radiating metta, compassion to all beings, and just becoming receptive to that, as it were, joining in with it, is how I approach, again, this part of the practice. I find it quite difficult to, say, I'm spending metta out to all beings, but then it stumbles across him and them and them. But I can join in, as it were, with this limitless mind of a higher being, sending metta and goodwill in all directions. It gets me out of the way for a while, as I said. It allows me to step out of my small self for a while and join in with big mind. I don't know how to take the time. Okay. Too long. And this is the equivalent of, it's the equivalent of moving beyond the ego. We've softened the barrier between ourselves and others. We've expanded our identification to all beings and our cherishing for all beings. We've gone through a small death, a small spiritual death, and a small spiritual rebirth when we do this, through receptivity. And by doing this over and over again, it gradually becomes who we are. And when it becomes who we are, then that's equivalent to spiritual insight, if you like, beyond the words and concepts. We've reached a goal, if not the goal. So what's the takeaway from all this? The takeaway from all this is do the Metta Bhavana. Make it central to our practice. Don't shy away from it. People, I think, shy away from the Metta Bhavana and and prefer the mindfulness breathing, as I did when I first started doing it. Firstly, because it seems a busy practice, and we're often too busy. So try and do it grounded in the body and not lost in a mental world. Try and stay grounded in the body. And that's why it's important to do the mindfulness of breathing as well. And eventually the two practices sort of come together so that we're mindful in the body, but also in metta. The two come together. Don't push away. The other reason I think that people don't do the Metta Bhavana is because it makes them aware of negative feelings, or simply of being alienated from all feeling. And I think to go beyond that, we need to just accept, at least allow ourselves to be aware of negative feelings. Allow ourselves to be aware of them. Experience them, watch them. If we need to sort of let them out so that the positive emotions can come out. There's a book, I don't know whether it's only a good book, but it's a good title, which is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Well, we need to fear the resentment or the competitiveness or whatever and wish the person well anyway. We need to feel whatever it is and be kind anyway. We need to feel whatever it is and be generous anyway. And we need to do that because the goal is like living in heaven right here and now, and that would be really well worth it.